Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Sean Casson. I'm the director of the Eric Parsegian Medical Research Fund at the University of Notre Dame. Just to give you some brief intro into our organization, the Parsegian Fund was founded in 1994 when Cindy and Mike Parsegians, three of their four children, were diagnosed with Niemann-Pick type C disease, and since then they launched a foundation focused on raising money to support research to find treatments and cures for NPC disease. About 5 years ago, they merged their foundation with the University of Notre Dame. And at that point, I became the director of the foundation. With us today in this webinar, we have Dr. Steve Romano, who is the Vice President and Chief Scientific Officer at Mallinckrodt, and Dr. Susan Baminer, who is the Chief Clinical Director at Mallinckrodt. Just kind of give you some basic info, on how this will work. They're going to present for about 5-10 minutes their update on the Adrabetadex program, and then we're going to have Q&A. Questions will be asked through this chat function, but before I even talk about that, I just want to make sure everybody, every family, be reassured that we're going to ask every question. We're going to get to your questions. I want to make sure that your voices are heard today. So please submit them. If we also are planning on, if we don't have enough time to ask everything, we will forward all the questions over to Mallinckrodt. We will also know that, there are people available such as Sheila and others at Mallinckrodt you can reach out to if you want to continue a conversation, really voice some of your concerns and have some questions answered. You can continue to do that. And in the future, we're going to be hosting other forums where we'll bring in some of the clinicians to answer some of your questions as well. And those will be made available in the next few weeks. So again, with the chat function, you simply click down on the chat, type in your question, and during that thing, we will do all we can to get to as many or all that we can. You can also email me if you're struggling with the chat function. My email is seancasson@nd.edu, so SKASSEN @ND, so notredame.edu. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve.
Thanks, Sean. Good afternoon, good evening to everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. As you've most likely heard, this past Wednesday, we shared some very difficult news with the NPC community regarding our conclusion on the benefit-risk balance of Adrabetadex, as well as what it means for the development program in NPC. I'm going to ask Susan to talk in a minute about the technical aspects and the impact of this news. But first, I wanted to tell you that all of us at Mallinckrodt are truly saddened about this development. We have gotten to know many of you and your children and families over the past several years and have come to deeply admire and appreciate your courage, commitment, and resilience. We would much rather be coming together over better news today. We hoped for a different outcome than announced, but unfortunately, after additional work, this is just not the case. So I'd like to ask Susan to provide some details around the developments we have shared. And for those of you who don't know Susan, she's been leading the development efforts on the Adrabetadex program since day one of M&K acquiring the drug, and this was back in early 2018. She and really the entire team have been tireless in their commitment to this program, and more importantly, to the patients. So Susan, I'll turn it over to you for comments.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Sean, for allowing us to be on this webinar. I know all of you have been on this journey of Adrabetadex. Mallinckrodt has been a small part of the journey, and there's been highs and lows. Unfortunately, today we have to talk about a low. Last summer, as all of you know, we had good news from the FDA. They approached Mallinckrodt and asked us to really consider submitting a new drug application or an NDA using the data we already had. And they agreed that another trial or study was not necessary, potentially. We were thrilled when we heard this. I mean, it was very encouraging news. It supported our belief that there was benefit of the drug and that we could show it. When we got that news, we looked at all of the data to really show what is that benefit. And to support a new drug application, you have to have a level of evidence to support an effect. It's not necessarily even for a rare disease that you have to show statistical benefit. It is, can you show a clear trend of benefit? We have looked at all of the patients in the clinical studies. So the phase 1 patients that started treatment in 2013, the patients that enrolled in BTS 301, and even patients in the expanded access programs. Unfortunately, all of the analyses that we have done with the clinical study patients really do not support any benefit of Adrabetadex treatment alone. What they show is that patients that are on miglustat, with or without Adrabetadex, show disease stabilization. The patients that are not on Adrabetadex show disease worsening. This is not at all what we expected to see, but it is something that we have seen very consistently in all of the analyses that we've done. I know that one logical question is, well, if you just looked at patients longer, wouldn't you see a benefit? We tried to do that, and we see the same exact thing. Now, I will admit that we are aware of the data from Rush University. They've shared it with us as they've shared it with you. I think the technical challenges that we have with our data, confounding by miglustat being a big one, I think the data will show a very similar trend. So we really do not have anything at this point to say there's a benefit. As Steve said, this is not to say that your children did not receive benefit. It is really just saying we do not have evidence of benefit that we can put in front of the FDA or any regulatory agency. There has been no new changes in safety, so you know the safety of the drug. What has changed is the benefit. So at this point, we have said that the benefit risk balance is negative. It doesn't mean that Adrabetadex harmed any of the patients that took it. It just means that we cannot show a clear evidence of benefit. I do want to let you know that this is not something that Mallinckrodt looked at alone. We've had several consultants work with us. And also there's an independent data monitoring committee for study BTS 301. The independent data monitoring committee and all of our experts have agreed with our conclusions. So, unfortunately, we've had to communicate this to you, to the doctors that are treating your children, and to all of the organizations that are involved in making sure that things are done safely. So IRBs, institutional review boards, the FDA. As a result of this finding of no benefit, there are some changes that we've had to institute. So first, we cannot allow any patients to start treatment with Adrabetadex now. We are recommending that treatment with Adrabetadex stop as soon as possible, but we are very, very cognizant of the fact that what we're telling you today and what we're telling your doctors is very difficult news, and that you need time to understand this news and to talk to your doctor to figure out where you go next. So we are providing Adrabetadex for up to an additional 9 months to allow that transition to happen. This provision of Adrabetadex for up to 9 months does have some contingencies. So first and foremost, you will need to have reconsent. So you'll need to look at the new information and agree that you want to continue treatment. We'll also need approval from institutional review boards and the health authorities. We have talked with the FDA, and they are supportive of allowing this 9-month transition. So, unfortunately for us, this is the end. We do not see any way with the information that we have to go forward. And, as Steve said, we are disappointed and saddened by this news. So I'm going to turn it back over to Steve.
Sorry, apologize. Yeah. So bottom line is, I just want to again say how disappointed we are and how much we understand how challenging this decision has been for you all and will be in the future as you work through the next 9 months or so to manage this. So we absolutely appreciate that. We're here to answer questions. We want to have a very open dialogue with everyone today and answer as many questions as possible. So our thanks to everyone that we worked with these last few years. It's been a valuable journey of our learning and collaboration. And I think with that, we will open it up to questions and answers and see to what extent we can respond to any of your queries.
Hey, Steve. You can hear me?
Yes.
So, there's a ton of questions, obviously. And I'm going to start with one that many people are asking. I just got from Phil Morella. Phil, as many people know, his son Andrew's been on Adrabetadex for one of the longest tenure of families with it.
Mm-hmm.
Always talks about the impact it's had on Andrew and stabilizing him. And then it runs the gauntlet to a family we just met. Her name's Sarah, and her daughter Emma was declining, went on Adrabetadex after 7 IT infusions, and mentioned that, not only she stabilized, but she's been able to do things she couldn't do before.
Mm-hmm.
So these families, and it runs the gauntlet, they want to know what data was used. I know you
Mm-hmm.
briefly mentioned it, but you guys always talked about the totality of data, not just from the trial, but the totality, including the EAP programs, what data was used, what data wasn't used. And then lastly, we made the FDA has talked about the voice of the patient. Where was the voice of the patient during all of this? So if you can comment, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll start, and I'll have Susan comment as well, because she's been involved in these activities, but particularly the analyses that we carried out. One of the things, let's take a step back. 3 years ago, one of the things that disappointed all of us was when we got the results to Study 301. When we got the results for that pivotal trial, we were surprised, obviously. We had hoped that there would be a distinction between the patients who were receiving drug and the patients who were receiving sham therapy. That was the first and major disappointment we saw. So one of the things we did, since we didn't see a progression in either arm, was to go to the agency, and we talked with the agency. The agency did, in fact, tell us that they were open to evaluating not just that data in 301, so necessarily doing the kind of post hoc analyses and evaluation of that data set to extract any understanding we could, but also to look at every other data set that might be available. And that went back to the original phase 1 study that was done out of NIH. It included the evaluation of patients in an EAP. So really any data we had, and the continuation of patients from 301. What they were suggesting was that if we could find a clear benefit buried in the challenges of the 301 study, we could use the additional data sets to strengthen the argument. So although we will have not met the requirements, i.e. having a statistically significant effect demonstrated in a pivotal trial, If we could show benefit within that trial, if we could show trends that suggested a benefit over sham treatment, then all of the other data would be considered supportive and helpful. So that meant that you could, in fact, look at information that was less than standard requirements and still consider whether there was an effect. So essentially, that's just what we did. We first focused on 301 because that was really the most important data that was generated. It was in a controlled setting. So regardless of all the complications we've shared with you, it was a controlled trial. It had a control arm, and we could evaluate it there. So we looked there first, but we also looked at data longitudinally beyond the 301 primary endpoint. We looked at and spoke to experts like Liz and looked and explored the opportunity of evaluating the data from the EAP. And of course, we looked at the phase 1 data as well as its comparison with the historic control, the longitudinal data set. So we did look across it. But the bottom line is it was very important in this one large controlled study to see if we couldn't see a benefit, in which case, if we were able to, the other data would support it, would be supportive. So maybe Susan, you want to comment on the work that we've done?
Sure. So I can assure you we've looked at every single bit of clinical data from the studies, taking patients from when they first started treatment and going forward. That's been done. The other thing that we tried to do, because we did not show any difference in the 52-week controlled portion of the VTS 301 study, we tried to set up what's called an external control group, or a group of patients that are not treated with Adrabetadex that we could compare Adrabetadex treated patients to. Unfortunately, for a lot of reasons, we cannot do that. So the NIH Natural History Study is great. I mean, it's generated, a lot of information. But one issue that we found is that there are patients with a lot of missing data, likely because they didn't return for a visit. It's not unexpected at all, but what happens is when you have so much missing data, there's no way that you can say, okay, we have a control group. It's not really a valid group to make a comparison to. So then we're stuck with the individual patients. And I do not doubt at all that Andrew and other patients have benefit. It's just that I cannot use that data of individual patients to say to FDA, we can show you a benefit that's very clear and meets your evidence standards.
Yeah, I just want to underscore that because that is exactly the case. We're not saying the drug doesn't work in certain circumstances. What we're saying is we have an inability to reach what we would believe is a minimum standard of evidence in order for the agency to take a very serious look about whether or not the product is demonstrating benefit and whether that is robust enough to make a decision around approval. That's really the challenge. I mean, development is tricky. It's built on sort of sequential learning phases. And, one of the things that was very compelling about this product was the data we saw in the animal studies. The animal studies, as you know, were very compelling. That often, but not always, predicts a translation into the clinical population. And we would have hoped that would have predicted a much more robust effect. Now, there are differences between those animal studies, obviously, and the heterogeneity of the population as far as timing of the onset of neurologic disease, age, et cetera, and you try to control for that. But the bottom line is it was very frustrating. So you've got really interesting and compelling preclinical data. You move into the clinic, you've got a phase 1 trial that was done by NIH that also suggested a benefit, certainly enough to move forward and design a phase 3 trial. Now you're doing this all in the backdrop of one of the hardest settings, which is an ultra rare condition where there are very few patients, as you all know. But the bottom line is we would have hoped to have seen a benefit in that phase 3 program and unfortunately didn't for many reasons. One of the major reasons, of course, is that we believe, and the experts believe as well, that 1 year just simply is not enough to demonstrate a benefit. But it may not even be 2 or 3 years. It may be 4 or 5 years, and it may very well be that your best ability to demonstrate that is to perhaps get patients that are very similar. That is, early onset, neurological symptoms, get them all in a trial. Now, given the logistics of doing that in an ultra rare condition, you can only imagine it would take years and years. So there were compromises that logistically you had to make in order to progress a program like this. The problem is, again, unfortunately, in the end, you just don't have a strong enough signal or a foundation of data that the agency would really need to, in order to make a decision around whether or not the product is effective. And I just want to add another challenge, we spoke to this briefly, was miglustat use. And I know many people might not think miglustat is effective. It didn't get approved, et cetera. But what we saw in the analyses we're doing, and this, to tell you the truth, is sort of a silver lining, if you will, in all of the work we see a pretty consistent effect that the patients who are on both Adrabetadex and miglustat, or even miglustat alone, are the ones that are demonstrating an effect over time. If you tease out, and we get into small numbers here naturally, but if you tease out those patients who are only on Adrabetadex, you just simply don't see that at a group level. You don't see that in the data. So there is a silver lining here, and we're going to obviously move forward to share all of this information because we do think that is an interesting piece of information that should be, vetted and clarified. So it's not that an individual may not have benefited. In fact, I have to believe that anecdotally, the cases that have been presented are meaningful. And to experts who understand the course of the disease, they're seeing something that would be unexpected, which is stabilization or improvement. Unfortunately, when you take that to the group level, which is required in order to get a review of the information and a vetting of the information, a fair vetting at an advisory committee through the agency, is just unfortunately not there. It's painful to admit, and we've done everything we can. And I have to tell you, Susan and others have looked at this data and our statisticians in every possible way. So it is very frustrating, but I definitely want to acknowledge that there may very well be individuals who are benefiting, but unfortunately at a group level, we can't demonstrate that.
So the follow-up question then, that many of these families are putting out there, was the letter that was sent to us that we shared, community. You just mentioned individuals might be getting benefit. Their condition, and everybody that work with their IRBs just saw a note that says Mallinckrodt is recommending that everything be discontinued now.
Yeah.
The language itself, most of these, I'll even just read that, Harry Kujayan, his son Alec is on it. He said that was a false statement because, based on extensive, comprehensive review of all clinical data, there's no clear evidence of potential benefit. Okay, but they're saying there is this hope that there is, they're seeing a benefit, but now they're not going to be able to get to, now their hospital is just going to turn it down. Like how, what do you do? What are they supposed to do?
Well, and honestly, the individual challenge and, disappointment at a family or patient level, I absolutely understand. And I wish there were a way around it. But I think, when you're looking at exploratory therapies, you have to have a sound basis, a foundation to believe that there is a likelihood of benefit when patients are exposed. Individual cases, unfortunately, don't cancel out the fact that we cannot demonstrate that. So again, we're talking about, and I'll admit, these are the constraints of drug development versus knowing that someone is doing well on something. And if it were something that could be taken over the counter, everybody could take it. But we're talking about a product that has to be manufactured, and it's got to be given intrathecally. There are risks to giving a drug intrathecally. So even though you have individual benefits, the risks right now, without having convincing benefit on the efficacy side, just makes it impossible to continue. So I understand the tragedy of a family and a patient where they're seeing benefit, an individual case. But in drug development, unfortunately, we simply don't have a path forward. If there were a path forward, we'd pursue it. I will say that. But short of doing a long-term trial that would be very difficult to execute, perhaps would take years, and I mean many years, 5, 10, even longer. There's just not a practical way forward. So I don't want to count. I hate to counter the experience of an individual and family. That's not what I'm here to do. But as a drug developer for a company that works within a regulatory framework, there are evidentiary standards that we just simply have to meet. And even when the agency has been as open and facilitating as they have, and they have been that here, we just simply don't have the foundation to support an NDA and a robust evaluation of that data set for purposes of approval.
So, just a quick follow-up. Did you come up with that? A couple of people asked, did you come up with this language in conjunction with the FDA?
We provided this data to the FDA. In other words, we had a conversation with the FDA actually very recently. Once we got to our internal position, and by the way, once that position was similarly agreed to by a DMC, and they're an independent reviewer of the same data. So yes, we provided this information to the agency as far as communicating to them what we were doing. They didn't provide us that language. We said, this is what we're doing. This is the conclusion we're drawing. These are the steps we're going to take. And yes, so that's the extent to which the agency has been engaged. They've listened. We're going to provide them any additional information they'd like, but they understood our situation. They certainly understood our situation. I can't talk for them beyond the exchange we had last week.
You mentioned risk benefit, and you said it was a risk benefit. These families are stating, and I just want to read you one from, again, Phil. He said, you speak of risk, but our family's risk assessment for Andrew was even explained in a March 3rd, 2015 front page article of the Wall Street Journal. And yes, Andrew suffered some hearing loss from that with increased dose, but he hears perfectly today with hearing aids, and his hearing has been stable now for almost 6 years. What are the other risks? What other risks have we as families of dying children not fully considered and accepted that you believe are too grave? And in what these other families are asking is, they're willing to take a risk benefit if it could help their child, if they could be one of those children. And that letter to them, you just denied them that with that IRB.
Yeah. So let me. I absolutely understand that. Again, when you talk about an individual who appears to be benefiting, then naturally that family has made an informed decision based on any risk that they will accept the risk because the benefit in that individual has been positive. We need to make a benefit risk assessment that's based at a group level. All the data we have to look at that information. When we look at that information, we cannot with confidence extract a benefit on the efficacy side for this product. We simply cannot from the data that we have available to us, and that is looking at it in every way possible. The risks, though, are well known. So hearing loss obviously is one, but there are other risks. I mean, again, this is administered intrathecally. We've had incidences of hematoma, so there are other risks. But no, you're absolutely right. The major risk is hearing, and in the case that an individual appears to be benefiting and the hearing has been corrected, which is terrific. That's great, but that has to be replicated at a group level. At some point, you have to go to the agency with a certain amount of data that is reviewable and is vettable, if you will, and you can challenge it through evaluation and analysis and demonstrate an effect that is consistent and is on the benefit side of the equation and offsets any risk. If we had been able to show even the slightest but reproducible and consistent benefit, you're absolutely right, and the family is right. The issues around hearing loss, et cetera, probably would still pale in comparison. But we have to have that minimal confidence in a positive effect and a assumption around a potential for positive effect in new patients being exposed. So you can't draw the line from an anecdotal case or 2 or 3 even to the group of patients who may then be exposed. You have to have some confidence in the reproducibility and the expectation of benefit. And that we just simply don't have. I know it's painful to hear, but I wish we could have found a efficacy signal that was reproducible, that we were confident in. And I think even if it were a weak one, given the condition and the fact that there were no available therapies in the United States, and some of these patients obviously will progress, to death. We understand that, but if we had only had some effect, there wouldn't have been much that would have taken the agency an ability to review the data and bring it to an advisory committee for vetting. We don't have that, unfortunately, Sean.
And I would just like to add, Mallinckrodt has an obligation to share the information we have. We have to share it with the doctors that are treating your children. We have to share it with the other groups that oversee the safety of your children. That includes institutional review boards and FDA and other regulatory agencies. So, it's not that Mallinckrodt wants to take away something from you. We have to share this information. And, I know that this is devastating news. It's frightening, but we have to follow the evidence. We can't ignore it.
So, there's a lot of similar questions here, but I want to make sure we get to all of them.
Yeah.
Some of these families have commented they've gone to conferences in the past and they've seen, Liz's data and Denny's data, and they shows with their EP programs, a clear benefit. They see a benefit in their own child, and they want to pursue this. They want this to continue, even if it means a longitudinal, much longer study. They strongly feel that letter that you guys sent really hurts that effort in trying to pursue that. I'm going to ask you to comment on it again, and I'm going to ask you if there is a path forward, what would that be?
Susan, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So why don't I talk to the Rush EAP data?
Mm-hmm.
Sean, you are absolutely correct. Liz has shown data that suggests, doesn't prove, but suggests a benefit. One thing to consider when you look at that data is that there's no control group. So you're seeing the observations and following patients, but there's no comparison to patients that don't receive treatment. The same challenges we have with the clinical data will exist for the Rush data. There's going to be confounding by miglustat. There is not an ability to set up an external control group for comparison. So, yes, that data looks very good and it's very compelling until you start considering these other challenges. So, again, we know that there's patients that are benefiting. We're not trying to say that's not happening. None of the evidence that we have supports a group effect. And that, as much as we hate it, requires us to inform people of this fact, and people will make decisions. So, doctors will make decisions with you about the care of your children. IRBs will make decisions. That is something that has to happen.
Yeah, Susan, thank you. What I will add also is that I don't think the fact that we are issuing this means someone or some entity can't continue to work or choose to work in there. That's not the case at all. In fact, this would be interpreted in the context of decision-making within a development program, which and within the regulatory sort of constraints and requirements. So I do not think that is, I mean, it is not a death knell to the product. It is just a fact right now of communicating the information as we know it. But that does not mean someone else or some other entity couldn't consider moving forward, because they'll look at the same information. It's not that, we're closing the book on this. They'll look at the same information. Maybe they'll have a different view of the logistics and practicality about doing additional work. Maybe in the hands of academics, they might want to do more. I mean, there's all different ways some work can continue, but again, so I wouldn't see that as a true negative, if you will, with regards to the impact on future. It's just an assessment based on the data we have now, and I think informed folks will understand that, and we would certainly help them understand that.
I do think that these families would love to see at least some clarification when it comes to that, when they do share this, with their hospitals, that this is your reasoning, but there is other data out there, such as Liz's, that, might contradict this. And that's something that I know a lot of these families would love to see. That might make it easier, because I know they do want to continue with these longitudinal studies, and they're just very upset about this.
I understand.
So just for everyone's awareness, part of the information that we supplied to doctors and that will go to the hospital institutional review boards and to FDA and other regulatory agencies is something we call a 15-day report. And this document or report that we put together outlines all of the benefit and risk assessment that went in it. There is information about Rush. The data that was in the last report that Dr. Barry Kravis sent to FDA was extracted. We did not modify it. We did not do anything. We said, here is the information from Rush, which suggests there is a potential benefit. So hospitals and other involved parties will see this information. They are at liberty to contact, if they want to get information, they can contact Dr. Barry Kravis. So I do want to assure people that we're not saying that there is absolutely no evidence of benefit. We presented all of the analyses that we did. We presented the information from Rush and just provided a summary of how we got to our findings.
Okay. I do want to make two comments, and then I'm going to ask another question. Again, I'm trying to speak for the families here. I know a lot of them want to hear from Liz and others, and we will be setting up a forum for that in the near future, hopefully in the next week or two, for all the families to listen to them. I know people from the FDA are on this, and I would hope that they also would consider joining that as well. Some families do want to make a point that they do. I have to say this, that a lot of this, for 3 years, you guys have been committed to this. There are families that have been, I just saw a note from Doug Burns, and him and his daughter Samantha, every 2 weeks from Minnesota would either fly or drive to Chicago for the last 6 years. They've committed to this. And they feel that within like a snap of the fingers, poof, everything just changed. And it's just very upsetting to them. And furthermore, a couple others have asked a question in regards to, has some of these decisions were brought by, some of the bankruptcy and the financial things that have been going on in Mallinckrodt that may have led to some of these, this change. So if you can just kind of address that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is not the case. I want to be very clear about it, but I think maybe there's a principle we need to clarify. When a company is in possession of information that is contrary to assumptions, you need to communicate that, particularly if it has an impact on benefit risk. That is something we do on a regular basis. So for instance, there was a period of time, as you know, that we were doing some of these analyses and it was suggestive of benefit. We discovered in one of the important analyses that we were asked to do that there was a misinformation around the labeling or the identification of patients who were also on miglustat. And that confounder became much more obvious, which meant it was that much harder to distinguish a benefit in this drug. That changed the equation. So once you have done that analysis and you have that data and you're confident in that analysis, if that information has an impact on your current view of benefit risk, and if it changes it, we are obligated to convey that. Sometimes that may feel like it's coming out of left field. It is not. We have a short period of time at which we have to come together, understand whether or not this new piece of information in any way changes the benefit risk. If it does, we have to communicate that to sometimes directly to the agency, to other agencies, to the DMC, and we have to act on that. So I know it sounds like all of a sudden something happened. Well, it is true that at some point we had new information and we had to act on that information. So that was really hard not to do. We're obligated to make that assessment based on data as it arises. So I just want to make that very clear. And that had absolutely nothing to do with bankruptcy. I mean, actually, the contrary. We'd love to move forward as many products and programs into later phase and into review and get them to patients. There's a benefit to that. We're a public company. There's a benefit to getting treatments and getting them to the market. So no, I just want to be very, very clear about that. But I also want to be clear about the fact when a company has new information, we are compelled and obligated to evaluate that, and if it has an impact on the benefit risk, if it has an impact on anyone who's taking the drug anywhere in the world, we have to convey that appropriately, and that's exactly what happens. So it does seem like it happened quickly, but it always happens quickly. Sometimes this happens, behind the scenes, and and it's during the development phase, and maybe it doesn't impact people so quickly as it did here, but it's not infrequent that actually happens.
Kind of a changing question. You guys mentioned miglustat, and that your data suggested that miglustat was having a benefit. We got a question from Jenna Wheat, who's from Iowa. Her son Jeg has been on the therapy for 3 years now. He also has Crohn's disease, and he can't take miglustat. There are a couple other families who mentioned the same thing. Julie Moore, and then Rebecca Spencer mentioned her son Jonathan just has a bad reaction. Jenna mentioned that her son has been improving and stable on the therapy alone. So for her personally to suggest that it's miglustat, I think that's just not acceptable to her. And also, if this drug goes away, she can't turn to them.
Yeah.
As her son's done. I'm just going to ask you to comment on that.
Yeah.
What do you suggest for those that can't turn to another thing?
Yeah. Well, first of all, yes, I understand personally how challenging that must be. That is true in many areas, unfortunately, that patients can't tolerate certain medicines. And if you're in a situation like this where there are no currently available medicines, it's even more challenging. So I certainly understand the difficulty there. But unfortunately, the same argument would apply. I'm happy to repeat it, but the same argument would apply that at this point, we simply don't have confidence in being able to demonstrate the benefit of this product based on the data that we've generated and the post hoc analyses that have been conducted to support a continued positive benefit risk. And let me tell you, we argued very differently 6 months, a year ago, Susan will tell you, because we had concerns come up from multiple regulators around whether or not we should continue to expose patients to this drug based on, and that was very, very recent. We had that come up with Germany, with the UK, with France. I may be forgetting one or two, but I think that was largely it, Susan. Bottom line is we went back and we argued vehemently that we were still looking at this. We felt there was a possible benefit that we could extract from the analysis we were doing, and that we felt it was right for patients to continue. And we convinced them. Now we come back, 6 months, a year later, we have different information. We have to convey that. So bottom line is we understand the tragedy and frustration of an individual case where benefit might be perceived. But it unfortunately, those individual cases, they just simply don't make it to the level of evidence required for the agency to review this, and that is painful. By the way, we see this in other areas as well. There are cases where certain oncology agents, you might have one or two patients that respond robustly, and the majority don't, and you can't identify those patients, so the drug doesn't progress. So it's not to say it's not working for that individual or an individual or a few. It just sometimes you just are stuck, and unfortunately, that's where we are right now. Look, the bottom line is, if it were practical to do a large, long-term trial against placebo, or even against standard of care, that would be great. It is very, very difficult to contemplate logistically and practically how you would do that. And particularly since, if you have data on miglustat, you cannot not allow people to be on other drugs, even if they're used off-label, if they've become standard of care. So then you're looking for even a smaller effect on top of standard of care. That challenges the power of your study, the length of it, the number of patients. It becomes even more complicated. So again, I don't mean in any way to deny the experiences an individual might be having or a family might be having, but it doesn't, unfortunately, negate the other set of facts that we have to manage. If I could think of a way forward, if Susan, if anybody in our organization could think of a way forward here to continue to develop this exploratory therapy, we'd be talking to the agency about that.
And I think one thing to add to that, Steve, is now that we have made that determination that we cannot see a way forward, we're not going to be allowed to continue to treat patients indefinitely. That just cannot happen. So, we've come up with what we think is something we can defend in terms of a 9-month period to allow for a transition. But even that may be challenging for some regulatory agencies or IRBs.
Many families are writing about. We've known for a while as a community that there were issues with the trial itself, and that when it comes to the placebo group, and that it's just in their mind next to impossible to do a trial with an ultra rare disease, in a placebo group.
Yeah.
They feel that the longitudinal studies are the only way in ever the hopes to actually show that this works, and they want to continue this going. So, since right now you own the license to this therapy, what is your intention with it? And not only with that, but with the data that's out there that you've collected.
Yeah, well, we absolutely feel obligated and will share all the information we've generated, including the additional analyses. And in fact, this week, I believe we began discussions with the Parsegian Foundation about presenting the data at its annual conference later this year. We want to vet all the data. There's no reason for us to hold on to it. And if others can extract insights that might be meaningful, whether it's for Adrabetadex or miglustat, that should be shared. We also, again, and I don't want to harp on the miglustat piece, but it is interesting, and it could be a silver lining, that the data we have does suggest a benefit from miglustat, and that may be meaningful and may even provide some additional opportunity for that company to perhaps pursue that indication. I don't know. But absolutely, we want to share that information soon. We want it to be vetted. We want other researchers to challenge it. If there are other data sets, for instance, the EAP, where analyses that are done by individuals want to be shared as well, all that information should get out there, and we should discuss it. And look, if there are paths forward, they may be, applied to future opportunities and other products that might apply to MPC. We should learn as much as we can and extract as much as we can from the work that's already been done to date. So we're very supportive of that.
And Steve, do you want to talk to, since Mallinckrodt's made a decision to not continue development, what could happen?
Yeah. So we could, we're going to look to see if there are opportunities, if someone or some other entity may be interested. There is the possibility, of course, of transferring the IND to another body or group. So that is something we will be exploring. I don't have answers to that specifically today, but it is something that we would definitely be exploring. Susan, I don't know if you wanted to add anything or if I'm forgetting something.
Yeah, no, I think as you said, there may be a third party that would be interested in having a transfer of the IND and continuing development. We're more than happy to engage in a discussion on that. If a third party is identified, we can talk through some of the things that are required when you have an IND and you are actively treating patients. Because I know, not everybody has drug development experience, but we're happy to talk about it.
Yeah, I'll just read a few comments that are coming out. The Hamad family said, my son Osama began to improve with his third infusion. He's on miglustat for 2 months. With VTS, he was able to walk and talk. 3 years later, he was closer to catching up with kids his age. Michelle Miller, why abandon the drug altogether if this is just based off some of this new information? Amy Whaley wrote, that each child seems to have some benefit. Hers, I'm trying to find her comment. So what I'm trying to get at is they want to continue. Her son improves speech and swallowing and then mobility. And so I hope that Mallinckrodt and others will help, that Mallinckrodt and others will help to continue to make sure that if there is a path forward, that it can get to an entity that will be able to do that, and that the community can continue to collect data around this therapy, and hopefully one day maybe get it approved if there is these alternate paths that we always hear about, because we know that doing a clinical trial in an ultra rare disease, with a heterogeneous population is just so difficult. I do want to run back to the, a lot of families, and we brought it up a couple times about, this letter that went out. Would you guys consider extending this longer than 9 months?
No. We have the conclusion of no benefit and risk. So the balance there is negative. Unlimited continued treatment is not an option. We believe that we can defend 9 months to have a transition, but as I said before, even that may be challenged by other groups that are responsible for overseeing the safety of patients that take investigational drugs.
Yeah, and I think that the challenge here, Sean, is if a company is not actively pursuing the development of an investigational product, you really you can't continue to provide it. We think the 9 months is a very reasonable time period, and I understand that folks might not view that as quote reasonable, but typically things stop a little quicker, and we know that that is certainly not reasonable in this population. And we haven't identified a new safety issue that would oblige us to push harder to discontinue. So to Susan's point, that was our recommendation. We shared that with the FDA. We'll share it with the other agencies where patients are residing, the areas that patients are residing. But it's unlikely we would be able to extend that for the reasons I just shared.
Look back in some of the questions from the beginning of the webinar, and there's two that have come out. One is there's been a lot of talk about the benefit of swallowing on S270. Can you comment on how were you able to, was that part of your analysis, able to find benefit?
Susan, yep.
And then, I'll ask that, and then I'll ask the next one.
Okay,
Yep.
sure. Susan, why don't you take that?
Sure. So there are patients treated with Adrabetadex that have had swallowing exams, both before treatment and after treatment. And there are patients in the NIH Natural History Study that never received Adrabetadex that also have exams. The major difficulty that we found when we started characterizing those patients is the majority of patients on Adrabetadex are also on miglustat. We know from recent data that Dr. Porter and NIH have shared, miglustat does change how fast swallowing becomes abnormal. And it's up to like a 3-year push from the data that they shared. Given how extensive the miglustat use is for the treated patients, we do not think we can show any benefit above miglustat. We would have to show an effect beyond 3 years, and it's very unlikely given the number of exams of treated patients that we have that we would be able to do it. The average follow-up was about 2.5 years. So yes, there are swallowing exams. Yes, that is an extremely relevant aspect to look at in this disease. The information we have right now today, I do not believe will support a benefit.
I have 2 more quick questions before I know we're getting to that 1:30 minimum. Somebody asked about when applications need to be into the IRBs according to Mallinckrodt.
Yes, so what we are requesting is that the physician and the patient and family have a discussion about this updated information. They document the discussion and the family decision. Submission to the IRB should be done in a very timely manner. This is considered substantial information, and IRBs need to know it as soon as possible. I know that a submission can't happen overnight. There are various rules and regulations, and IRBs don't meet on a daily basis. The submission should be as timely as possible. Mallinckrodt has provided information on the benefit information to be included in the updated informed consent. As soon as the IRB reviews that and provides approval, then the patient should re-sign consent. In the interval between the discussion with the family, verbal agreement that there's a benefit and treatment should continue until that IRB approval endorsement as well, treatment can continue. So, the discussion has to happen. Patient and family have to agree with the physician that continuation makes sense. Once the IRB approved amendment to the consent is available, that needs to be re-signed, but there's no halting between that time period, if that makes sense.
So this is one thing that came up a long time ago during the actual trial or after when they were looking at the data was when a couple of the children from the control group, they heard, declined and had to move on to VTS 270. How did that, I don't know if you have enough time to kind of go over that, but I know that the families, when you present at our conference or when you share this data, you're going to know how that effect was incorporated into this data.
So when we looked at the data, we took patients when they started Adrabetadex. The sham versus Adrabetadex is a moot point at this juncture. We were just taking treated patients, so whether they qualified for rescue and went into open label treatment or they got all the way through the double blind portion and started treatment, it doesn't matter. We considered the start of treatment and went forward from there. So all the data was included, nobody was excluded.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then finally, I just want to reemphasize, these families wish to continue. They
Mhm.
really want this data shared, and I know you've committed to doing that. They want it presented at a conference, and maybe if there is even a better time before that,
Mhm.
our conference isn't going to be until the end of June this year. They'd love to. If there was a format to do that, we would. I'm happy to set that up. And then in general, just making sure, their desire, when it comes to the license of this, to really push forward on trying to find
Mhm.
an entity to help
Mhm.
take over so our
Yeah.
fight, their fight, can continue.
Yep.
Absolutely, Sean. So, the Parsegian Foundation, NIH, other interested groups can certainly look to find that third party that would be willing to take on the development program. That, you should do that. We're not saying that you can't do that.
Okay, so with that, I'd just like to I just want to thank everybody for joining us. I'd like to thank
Mhm.
Steve and Susan and others for being on this call. As I said in the beginning, we're going to send all these questions that you have, and there's a lot of them. And I'm sorry, we're not able to get to all of them, but hopefully we got to a number of them. To Mallinckrodt so that them. We're going to be posting this webinar online, hopefully by the end of the day today, so everyone will have access to it. We will be working to have other forums for families, as well as to speak, as I mentioned, to some of the clinicians, Jenny and Liz. And we'll get that information out as soon as we can, probably early next week. And then we'll also continue our conversations with Mallinckrodt and look for this data to be presented at or not just our conference, but any conference, and in PDF and whatnot, so it can be evaluated in a public fashion.
Mhm.
So with that, I just like to thank everybody for joining us again. Thank you.
Sean, if I have, do I have a second?
Probably,
Yes.
yep, you got it.
Yeah, sorry. No, I just want to reiterate how deeply grateful we are, all the patients, the families, the caregivers, and the clinicians who have supported and participated in the Adrabetadex clinical trials, and essentially the entire global Niemann-Pick C community for its continued partnership. And we're also very thankful to the numerous NPC patient advocacy groups worldwide who have collaborated with us and have supported the community over the past 3 years. We still remain hopeful that the future does one day bring a treatment for this disease. And we're thankful for the opportunity to have worked with all of you and experienced the remarkable strength that exists in this unique and compassionate community. So I just want to thank you all from Mallinckrodt, excuse me.
All right, thank you, Steve. And again, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.